Telegraph now, Leo. Lewis Goodall of the famously impartial news agency complains that the BBC were afraid of not being impartial.
Yeah, so the BBC bosses panicked over impartiality rows during the pandemic, says Lewis Goodall. He's the former Newsnight policy editor who suggested that BBC bosses were panicked by accusations of left-wing bias during the COVID pandemic. And this basically comes down to, while he was at the BBC, Goodall became embroiled in a public spat over impartiality with Sir Robbie Gibb, a former director of communications at Number 10, I think under Theresa May, who was appointed as a BBC board member in 2021. Lewis Goodall wrote an article for the New Statesman that was very critical of the Tory government, and he was told after he'd had this sort of Twitter spat with Sir Robbie, the editors told him to be very careful and that Robbie is watching you. And Lewis Goodall says it was improper for someone on the board not supposed to be involved in editorial to be interfering. People high up in the BBC didn't seem to be pushing back enough. I mean, I don't know, surely Robbie Gibb, his place on the board of the BBC is to set governance and to set strategy and provide oversight for the BBC. And if you've got wildly partisan people directing news programmes like this, which Lewis Goodall clearly is and clearly was, and we can see it in his output now, how partisan he is, this is quite appropriate for Robbie Gibb to take the task.
I would say so. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, he says here, the wedge was driven between the media and the listeners. We said making out that we're all part of a liberal metropolitan elite who didn't care. Now, the people who did that was themselves. The audience are not blind. They can see for themselves, and he's just proved it. He goes onto this podcast, which is about the liberal metropolitan elite. That's who he is. So let's be honest here. Now, that GB News gets a lot of criticism, right? But the idea is that hopefully we're not hypocrites. That we state our opinions. We're not coming from a position of impartiality wherever we are on the political spectrum, and then we stay to it. So the idea that he was impartial is frankly just not true, and we see that now within his podcast.
I think you're absolutely right. Newsnight was not a bad show. You know, they used to have on some pretty good guests. There were some good ding-dongs over the years. But it is so blatantly obvious with him on there now, with Sopel and Mateless. I mean, it's just embarrassing narrow. I mean, it's absurd, isn't it? It makes Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell look like, Gore Vidal and William.
He's criticised the BBC because he said they didn't fight for me to stay. He said he floated the idea of leaving, and they didn't. And I got the message like the ego on him. Like, it's crazy.
I guess he's happy enough now to be able to say it. John.